Hey everyone, today I'm going to tell you about graduate school. What is it like in graduate school? What can you expect when you go to graduate school? Now, my graduate school was a little bit different than most graduate schools. My graduate school was only a graduate school. There was no undergraduate program at my school, so there weren't any bachelor's students or anything like that running around. And so, because of that, I didn't have to teach any courses or any labs or anything like that in order to be a graduate student. Now, if you went to a school that has an undergraduate program for graduate school, then you'd probably be obligated to teach some labs or something like that. So, with that in mind, my graduate school experience, there wasn't a whole lot of coursework. You basically go, it's about a 6 year program for the PhD that I attended at UT Southwestern. The first year was what was called core course. And it wasn't even a year. I want to say it was like 6 months of core course. And core course meant that you would show up to a class every day and the teacher would rotate. It was really weird. So let's say we're learning about mitochondrial genetics. We'd have an expert on mitochondrial genetics giving the lecture that day. It would be a NIH member or a National Academy of Science member, or even we had Nobel Prize winners teach us about their various concepts. So if we're talking about cholesterol, we might have had Brown or Goldstein in there, Nobel laureates talking about cholesterol to us. If we were talking about G proteins, we had Gilman in there, and he was the Nobel Prize winner who discovered G proteins. We had lessons from the people who discovered those things in their fields, which was really, really awesome, but it was really also very difficult. Imagine one day you're learning about mitochondrial genetics from Dr. Perlman, and the next day you're learning about I don't know, or some organic chemistry from a different professor. You went from topic to topic, and sometimes there was really disconjointed. It didn't have much of a theme. We went from OChem to mitochondrial genetics to immunology to neuroscience, back to cell biology to molecular biology to, I don't know, cloning. I mean, it went on and on. So it was a very challenging course, and the exams were very challenging. The exams were take home, actually print at home. For the exams, you would wake up, go over to your computer, print out the exam, work on it at home for all day, and then go before 5 p.m. and turn it in. Now, those were stressful exams. And imagine an exam that was 20 pages long, and each page was a different professor, with a different field, with different questions. So those exams, I still have nightmares about those exams today. Those were really, really hard exams. But you know what? It made us eclectic. It made us learn a lot of different fields. Imagine learning about all of the different facets of molecular biology from all of these different experts. So it was invaluable. Now that I think about it in retrospect and I'm not actually going through it, it was pretty cool because I got a little bit of everything and I felt really well-rounded by the end of this core course. Anyway, that was core course. What you would do is go to core course, and then after core course, you would rotate in a lab. So what does that mean? The way graduate school works is that there are different professors, and each professor runs a lab. Okay, and I think at UT Southwestern there are over 200 labs. Different professors run the labs, and every professor has a different focus. Some professors studying a specific protein. Some professors are studying a particular disease. Some professors are looking at how a mechanism works. And there were all kinds of different labs. And basically what you do when you get there is you say, okay, I think I'm interested in this particular field. And then you would contact that person. I was interested in stem cells, so I contacted my old professor, Guang Zhao, and I was allowed to rotate in his lab. So I rotated in that lab. It was a stem cell lab. It was really neat. And then you got to rotate in other labs. If you're interested in more stem cell stuff, you could rotate in another stem cell lab to see what that lab's all about. And then you got another lab. So you got a total of 3 labs to rotate through. And then the point is you're going to pick a lab, and that's going to be the lab that you actually do your thesis work in, that you work in that you solve problems and you publish papers with that professor with both your names on the papers, and that's how it works. Now, it's very important you pick the right lab, and I'll make a whole video on this, picking the right lab, because you don't want to get into an environment that's not suitable to your learning style. Some people thrive in certain environments, others would crumble in that environment. So you got to find the lab where the vibe is suitable to your learning style, right? And that's why you've got the rotations. You don't want to just pick a random lab and join it and hope for the best, because every boss is different. Every PI stands for principal investigator, every professor is different, and you're working with this PI. And if you clash or don't get along, or their motivating style is not your cup of tea, then you're going to have a miserable 6 years. So anyway, during the first year of graduate school, you're doing the core course during the day. Then you're going later in the day, usually until night, working in a lab, and then you go home and unwind a bit, maybe read up some of the stuff you learned during core course. But most people focused on what they're doing in lab more than studying for core course. Core course was more of a obligatory thing. You have to hoop, you have to jump through, or hurdle you have to jump over. It wasn't really something everyone was like, oh, let's get an A. No one really cared about A's in graduate school. Everyone was way more focused on learning. And that's one thing I really liked about graduate school, especially Ph.D. programs. People aren't there to get A's. No one cares about an A. Everyone was there to learn, okay? If you got an A, you got an A. If you didn't, you didn't. Who cares? The main thing was doing neat stuff in the lab, researching, getting those discoveries, and trying to publish those papers. So then after a year of that, you pick a lab. So you say, okay, I've rotated in 3 different labs. I'm going to join this lab. And you pick, I don't know, Professor Smith. And now you're in Professor Smith's lab, and you're going to spend the next, 5 years in Professor Smith's lab. So hopefully you chose wisely. And that's it. Professor Smith will give you a project or let you select between a couple projects. Usually it's something not that you thought up, right, but that Professor Smith had written in a grant proposal, and she or he came up with different aims, specific aims in that grant proposal, and you get to choose between 1, 2, or 3 different aims, and that is your thesis project. That's your project. So you're going to be coming in every day like a job and solving this problem and trying to figure out what the results are to that particular problem, and maybe you could discover something neat in the process, right? So again, core course by this time is over. You had a few more courses after core course, but not anything significant, like 2 or 3 other little courses. But coursework was generally over within a year. After that, like I said, you join the lab that you pick from your rotations, and now you are working with that professor, that PI, towards your thesis, and you're doing work, and you're trying to discover something brand new no one else discovered, and you're working usually in a small group. The smallest labs are usually like a professor, a student like yourself, and a technician or something. The bigger labs, oh boy, like Eric Olson's lab at UT Southwestern was a behemoth lab. Some of those labs get huge. They've got instructors, which are basically PhDs who are almost professors. You've got postdocs, which are people who have just finished their graduate studies. There are PhD students. There are technicians. There are hordes of technicians, and there's like specialists. So you can have a lab that's like 20 members, 30 members, even more sometimes. Or you can have a professor who's just starting out, who doesn't have that kind of funding yet, or that kind of notoriety yet, and it's just a small little close-knit team. So anyway, let's say you join a medium-sized lab. It's like 5 or 6 people. So you're going to see those people every day for 5 years, or whatever it takes to finish your thesis. Some people finish their thesis in 3 years. Some people took like 10, and a lot of people washed out. A lot of people didn't finish at all, and they kind of gave up or found some other calling in life and left before finishing their PhD. So what do? You spend, like I said, the next 5 years. What is a typical day like? You come in the morning, you set up some experiments, maybe do a lab meeting, once a week. There might be a lab meeting. Some people had more than one lab meeting. You do lab meeting, and I'll do a whole video on how lab meetings go. And, you come in, you do a lab meeting, then you set up your experiments. You do a bunch of different experiments throughout the day, break for lunch, come back, set up some more experiments. A lot of times you'll have a 3-hour wait step, and so you could start another experiment during your 3-hour wait step. And the biggest pain experiments were the ones with mice, or the ones that had 12-hour wait steps, because you might have to come in at 3 a.m. to finish an experiment that you started at 9 p.m. Those were like 6-hour experiments. So it was a lot of work, but it was work, and that's why you're getting paid. As a graduate student, you get a stipend, you get paid upwards of around $30,000 a year to be a graduate student. You're getting benefits, because you are working. You are producing results that will get grant monies, and those grant monies in turn pay you. So it's a job. A PhD program is a job. Now, like I said, if I was going to a school with an undergraduate program, I'd probably had to have been teaching during the day and then researching at night, or something like that. But since I went to a school with no bachelor students, no undergrads, I didn't have to do that. It was a job. Wake up in the morning, come in, set up experiments, try to get results, and go back home, at the end of the day, or at night usually. And a lot of times we had to work 6 days a week, 7 days a week, holidays. It was very grueling, and it was not uncommon to see people there on Thanksgiving Day, in lab. So it's very, very demanding. Anyway, so you do this for about 5 years. At some point at the end of your second year, you get to do your qualifying exam, which means it's a big test or a presentation you do, that if you pass, you are a PhD candidate, and if you don't, you washed out. So you pass that test, now you're a PhD candidate, which means if you were to leave after that point, you would have a master's degree. It's called the terminal master's. And then you would continue on and work on your thesis, publish papers, work with your professor and your thesis committee. I'll do a whole video on thesis committees. Basically, it's your professor and, usually around 3 other professors in the field or on campus that will also help guide your research. And at some point, after 5 years of hard work, your professor and you and your committee will decide you've about finished. You've discovered some neat stuff. You've published some neat stuff, and it's time for you to defend your thesis. You then put together your thesis. You write it up. You go over it with your professor, and then you hold a thesis defense date. And after many years of working hard, day and night, long hours, you get to defend your thesis, show everyone what you've been doing for the last 5 years, day and night, or actually 6 years total now, day and night. And once they sign off on it, and they say, "Hey, good job, you're done." They shake your hand, and you're a doctor. And you can take your first step out of that door, knowing that you have finished a body of work that warrants you to be called doctor from now on. And it's a good feeling, and that's a typical grad school experience. I'm going to go into more details and more videos, because I can't tell you all of what happens in grad school in one video, but that's the gist of it, or at least my experience. I hope this was helpful. I hope this gave you some insight as to what it's like to be a PhD student. And if you have any other questions about PhD programs, let me know. If you'd want me to do a video on some other aspect of the PhD experience, which I'm going to do anyway, but I'd like to hear, what you have to say. I do appreciate you watching. Please like or subscribe, leave a question or comment below, and I'll be seeing you. Thanks again.